Here on the Creative Thinker podcast, we discuss all theories, philosophy, and thought behind the creative process. And we hope that you find some inspiration along the way.
Hello and welcome to the Creative Thinker podcast. My name is Henry Moon and I'm joined by
Michael Vasquez.
Shout out to creative thinkers all across this wonderful little globe. Today we're going to be talking about world building a magic system, what that looks like, how it affects your world, how it affects your characters, what does it look like, and why does it matter? We're going to be diving in deep to magic today. Michael, you got some great ideas about magic. I know that because I've been in your D&D campaign.
Hey, yeah.
And you merge a lot of sci-fi and fantasy and magic, and it's cool. It's cool how you do it, but tell us first. We're going to be talking about soft and hard magic, which, you know, if you don't have any context, that doesn't sound like anything. What does that mean?
All right. I'm glad you asked that. So soft magic and hard magic, these are the systems of magic that tends to be used in fantasy. Most of our fantasy famous movies or stories follow this system, whether it's Lord of the Rings, whether it's Game of Thrones, certain animes, Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Harry?
They all follow. Yep, they all follow this system, soft or hard magic. So, going to go through a little bit of a definition of what both of those mean, and then we'll give a couple examples, talk about it just a little bit, and then we'll explore a little bit more about magic in our own world that we have already started to create. Heading back to Reween later in the episode
To do a little more world building.
Yep.
So hang out for that. World building aficionados.
So again, going to definitions, we're going to go to the definition of soft magic. So soft magic is a system in which rules of magic aren't entirely known to the reader. There's an air of mysticism and it leaves a lot of room for the imagination, right? Think of soft magic as kind of a loose system. Again, the rules aren't entirely known.
So examples of soft magic in fancy literature that we would all know. I say fancy. Well-known soft magic films would be like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars, that sort of thing. Where there's like, you know, midichlorians was a little attempt at explaining Star Wars magic, but it's the Force. And we never really define much more of that. And there's a lot of functions that the Force can do that we don't really know how or why.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's your soft magic films. It's loosely understood how it actually works.
Yep, exactly. And then we'll kind of go a little bit more into those. Like, I want to put an example of each one of those films so you can really understand what that soft magic is. But we're going to hit hard magic first, the definition of that, just so when we're switching back and forth, we have an understanding of what we're talking about. So hard magic is a system in which rules are understood almost entirely by the audience. The audience knows the limitation of the system, and what cost characters must pay to use magic, and most of the magic's unique properties. So I think the probably more famous example of this is going to be Avatar: The Last Airbender. The hard magic that's there is, if you're a bender of water, you're not going to be able to bend fire, right? It's a hard system. You understand that. The Avatar is the only exception to that. So when we're talking about hard magic, think of something that's got a certain set of rules. And
if you've read like the Aragon books, right? Like anytime he casts a spell, he's like asleep for like 3 weeks in the first one, right? Like,
yeah. One of my main issues with that, because they explain a hard system of using, you know, this language to use magic and affect magic. And they say like it takes the user's energy and life, and he gets close to the point of death a lot of times, even though probably should have died for some of the things that he tried to attempt.
Yeah.
So going back to some of the examples of soft magic, we talked about Lord of the Rings. How many times do you remember magic being used in Lord of the Rings?
At all? I mean, I would count dragons flying and like the wraiths and things, but do you mean like Gandalf casting spells?
Yeah, like spell casting stuff.
Spell casting stuff, I'd say like 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So,
my
and what's the runtime of Lord of the Rings?
like 4.5 days.
Right. So
I'd say like 12 hours. Some if you do extended, right?
Yeah.
12 and a half.
And so think about how many times Gandalf does the same spell over and over again.
Yeah.
He doesn't really do it, right? He kind of does something with the Balrog.
Like the light spell he cast twice.
The light spell,
but
yeah.
it seems like a different one with the Nazgul than it did in the caves.
Yep. And so, but like, it's never explained where his magic comes from. It's never explained like how Sauron's magic comes from or what it comes from. And a lot of Lord of the Rings, it's kind of like you don't really understand how he got this magic. You understand that Gandalf is a wizard, but what does that mean? Especially we're just looking at the films. The books, I think they kind of go a little bit more, but it's still a pretty soft magic system.
And like he doesn't even cast a spell for the fireworks at the beginning, right? Like they pitch him as a wizard and he doesn't do anything wizardy for like
just
hours.
Fireworks. You know? So I think that was a good way. And in prepping for this episode, I listened to a lot of people talking about magic systems and Gandalf. In Lord of the Rings, like magic is something that's powerful and will create power, and power corrupts in Tolkien's world. And so Gandalf doesn't use a lot of magic because he doesn't want to like have all this power and be corrupted. I thought it was interesting.
That is interesting.
He doesn't use it a lot. Meanwhile, I mean, I don't know what Sauron uses to stay alive. Like what kind of magic is he using? But I'm assuming it's a lot because he's powerful and he's like the most corrupt and has like the most magic as far as like, you know, having magic over the Nazgul and things like that. So that's where that soft magic kind of example comes from. Did you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I was just reliving the films entirely from that with that new perspective. I just thought that was cool because he's like reborn as Gandalf the White from defending himself against the Balrog, right? Mm-hmm. And it was like he eventually killed it, but only because it was trying to kill him, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's like that was the rebirth.
Yeah. And that might be the most time that you see him casting spells in that little sequence.
Like a shield and then like breaking the bridge and then using the Balrog used the whip. Never mind.
So
but,
anyways, that's an example of Lord of the Rings. We're gonna go to Harry Potter. Like Harry Potter is this middle ground between soft magic and hard magic, where they go to a school. What the hard magic element is, there are muggles and then there are non-muggles. I can't remember what the term was called in the books, but I definitely remember muggle, right? But there are people born with magic and people who aren't born with magic. And I think that was pretty much like, I think you said Ron's
dad, I thought. Like Mr. Weasley, I don't think has magic.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Like he may have like a passable amount. Like I know he uses like the flume and all that stuff where it's like it's not really him doing the magic. So I don't know that he has any. Forgive me if I'm wrong because I'm not super familiar with that. But
I haven't seen or reread the books in over a decade.
Yeah,
over a decade.
I just rewatched the movies over Christmas, so I have no excuse, just bad memory. But anyway, I know that there are some people that inhabit the magical world that don't have magic. Mm-hmm. So it's like they're in the world of the world that aren't a part of it.
Isn't like one of the like groundskeeper of Hogwarts non-magical? Oh, Hagrid doesn't have magic, right?
Yeah, he's the groundskeeper. Yeah.
He just uses the magic items like the broom and the motorcycle, I think. I don't know.
I think so.
Sorry to our Harry Potter fan.
Yeah, we started strong on that Harry Potter example.
But anyways, like, so there's that part of the hard magic, and then there's like they go to school and they learn magic, but there's not really like a good building block on, you know, if you do this, then you're going to reach this tier of magic. If you do this, you're going to reach this tier of magic. Where we're going to end up talking about Avatar has a more hard magic system because you have to do your training, you have to hit your martial arts stuff. I think the reason why Toph was so good at bending is because she spent time with the creatures that were bending, and she learned straight from, I think, like the I can't remember what they were, like giant moles or giant beavers or something like that.
I think they're moles. Yeah.
Yeah. So like she learned from them, and then so they have this power that they learn from these martial arts moves that they learn. They have to go to instructors to get like to another level, and I think that's more of the hard magic. And then one of the other examples I'll use here in a little bit is Full Metal Alchemist. We talked about Star Wars, the Force. There is kind of, again, this potentially kind of hard magic thing where like you're Force sensitive, but what does that really mean? We talked about like Luke raising the X-Wing out of the swamp. Like, was that him being able, like, why was he struggling with that? Was it his belief in himself? Was it his control of the Force? Was it his midichlorian count wasn't high enough? I don't know. People can speculate. I have my speculations, but why is one Jedi stronger than another Jedi? And again, they try to explain it with midichlorians, but then the feats that are done, especially as more Star Wars canon stuff starts coming out, it's a lot harder for people to point out and say like, oh, this is the hard rule for Force users and how they can use the Force. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Lastly, Game of Thrones. Just from the show, it was weird. Some of the magic didn't make sense. There was did you watch Game of Thrones?
No.
Okay, well, didn't make sense. We'll move on from there. And so we used Avatar as the hard magic example, but the last hard magic example I want to use is Full Metal Alchemist. I really like this anime because their magic system is called alchemy, and how they use alchemy. There is the whole show is about the law of equivalent exchange. It's this idea that the end result must be equivalent to the materials that you put into it. However, an energy source is required to catalyze the transmutation, and this energy is then lost without it being returned. There are 3 hard rules in the show. Don't transmute gold, don't act against the government, and don't attempt human transmutation. So those 3 things are what you need to know about the show, because things happen if you do attempt this. The rest of it has to do with the government and the show and plot points and stuff like that. One other rule that they have is, what does it say? The energy source is required, or there needs to be an energy source. So they make these alchemical circles, and then that's where they do the magic from. But you have to make this circle. So that is so known in the show that you need to make a circle, and they make it a big point when the main characters don't use the circle. That you notice if somebody else isn't using a circle, or if someone else does use an alchemy circle, you can start to understand and pick up like just world building stuff from the show. And you can understand like the magic system. You can understand like this makes sense. You need X amount of iron to make an iron staff. You can't just make it out of nowhere. Everything there's this equivalent exchange. So whatever you do is going to be final. If you want to make stairs out of a building from the side, it's going to weaken the structure of the house or the building that you're doing it in.
Like, if you're using a sci-fi example of, it's like Star Trek versus like The Expanse. And I've talked about The Expanse on the show so much, but I watched all the seasons and I'm reading through the books. So it's like The Expanse is very in detail about how much time it takes to dock, how much time it takes, to do anything in space, as well as like to change directions, or like the physical toll it takes to go through certain types of fields in space, and things like Star Trek, it's like there's no cost to movement whatsoever. They only need gas if it's pertinent to the plot in that episode or movie or whatever. It's just like they're in space, and that's just like a tertiary part of the show. So
it's like someone asked me, how does hyperspace work? Like, how long does it take for someone to go from hyperspace from point A to point B in Star Wars? And I was like, I don't know, because George Lucas created Star Wars to be a soft magic system. He didn't want the Force to have some type of hard magic. That is what he created. He wanted to be this mystic, magical thing that no one can understand. It's like, oh, well, that's interesting. So he created a lot.
It worked.
Yeah, he created a lot of holes that don't like make sense for sci-fi, which, I mean, sci-fi in and of itself, isn't real. So anyway, so these
That's another argument for another time.
Yeah. So the thing with hard magic is the audience is going to understand the risk associated whenever a character uses magic. And with soft magic, you don't necessarily understand that. In Aragon, the book, we see him use magic, and you understand, and he begins to understand there is a risk associated with this. If I were to use magic here, I could potentially hurt myself. He also has the dragon's energy to like use some of his spells, which is, I think, probably how he survives some of his stuff. But and then when someone else uses magic, he's like, oh, you can already see their power level because they're not, flinching at it, or they're just able to use magic willy-nilly. So I think, those two separate things have a spot in your story. Hard magic, if you're someone who wants to like be a stickler to the rules and, have the audience know what's happening, without having to explain what's happening because you've already created that foundation. Or soft magic, where I feel like there's a little bit more room for like grandiose things to happen that don't necessarily make sense.
Yeah, I think like even in video games, like it changes everything about your world is what I'm getting at. It changes everything about your world. And like in video games, in some of the later Halo games, there was some guts and gore. Mm-hmm. And in some of the earlier ones is like very, very minimal. Mm-hmm. And you compare a game like that to like Gears of War, right? So like Gears of War is like very cause and effect, like you've got a chainsaw, you can saw somebody in half. Yeah. It's just ridiculousness. But anyway, so like the Gears of War game feels really heavy, gritty. Mm-hmm. It feels very intense. And Halo, it feels like a very mystical warrior on a journey, floaty in space kind of game.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it comes down to, that hard versus soft, the action consequence that is grounded in some sort of reality that feels real enough that we can place ourselves there. Mm-hmm. Because we understand the weight and consequence of life to some degree. And so, when we can relate enough to it, then we're like, oh, okay, yeah, I know I've seen something like this before. Mm-hmm. This feels real. Yeah. I think that's a really cool way to do it because like we were talking a little bit earlier about how where the magic comes from is also really important. Like in Avatar, the Blue People Avatar, the world is magical. And so it doesn't change what the people are able to do, their physical selves. Like they can't cast things or whatever. They can hook up to Awa or whatever and are able to interact with animals and the world around them. Mm-hmm. It changes the way the world is and the way how the world interacts and what people are able to do in conjunction with the world, but it doesn't change what people can do. Mm-hmm. So I think like the forces narratively that you can get out of just magic being in your story or something magical being in your story is really cool. It's a very versatile narrative tool. Mm-hmm. I think it's really nice. But yeah, so we already talked about Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I want to get Blue People Avatar in there.
Right. I like how we have to clarify it too.
Yeah. Well, now the last one was like Way of Water, right? So, I mean, you got to clarify all the way to just blue people.
Right.
And so with hard and soft magic, like I said, one, I think makes it a lot more of a scary place to be So like the mystical version of Star Wars, it's almost like you don't know what you're going to get. So if you have a hero coming up to a villain, it's a bit of a scary moment. If you haven't met this villain before, you have no idea what they're capable of. You don't know what weapons they have. Like it could be anything. And so it makes them a lot more intimidating on the face of it. And I think like for heavier or harder magic, then there is this sense that the villains are evil already. Like we get introduced to them as evil or heartless people, and they have the ability to do the magic, whatever the magic is. Yeah. And so it's like it's incumbent upon those writers to create really strong characters versus like, you know, we have a very fanciful world that is like, you know, which is my preference. I like things that are like, you know, a little bit superstition, a little bit of like, you know, people's natural fear of the dark, you know, things like that, where it's like you just kind of weave it in and it almost feels like to us like instinctual without explanation. I like that in my writing, but I like watching things that are very grounded because it makes me feel a little bit safer as a viewer. I just find that really entertaining. I like all story tropes. I think they're getting to sew them together is really cool. But we've both put a lot of time into creating, you know, from D&D to TV shows to whatever projects of short stories and fanfic that we're working on. So what kind of magic systems do you create?
So I think in the world that I'm creating and that I'm still in the process of outlining, can
you give us like a little bit of shading of what that world is, or is it still under wraps?
I mean, it's not under wraps. It's just I don't have like a title for it yet. So my title for it when I was writing, you know, the 5 different documents, and I chose it was Forest Town. So
nice
in Forest Town, and I have the name of the city or the village, but I just don't know what it is yet, or I don't know where it is in my docs right now. It is like this small village, and I wanted to start off really small. So maybe one day I can make a D&D campaign out of it. So I want to start super small and super low magic. And where I want it to grow is there is this feeling of soft magic to the world, whether it's this feeling of like nature magic or druid magic or some type of elemental magic that is not in control of the people. You see a lot of like wizards and stuff. They take control of like the arcane magic, and they're able to do kind of crazy feats still. But whenever you see like tropes of people trying to like get this elemental magic, it gets a little out of their control. And I want that vibe to where you can't control necessarily the elements, or nature is going to react in a way you might not expect it to. So in creating a magic system for that, I want it to be like there's school magic that you learn, and then there's nature magic that you might be gifted, and it might be a little bit more soft magic. So as I'm creating this world, I'm creating loosely this idea of both soft and hard magic into the world. How I want to introduce soft magic is kind of like a Fey realm or a Fey wild, being let loose slowly into the forest, right? So this forest town, I want it to have kind of like that spooky element, that element of, you know, don't go into the forest by yourself, especially at night, you know, because you don't know what's wandering out there. There might be like monsters or like old mythology of like fairy tales and, you know, crazy different, like if you look at like England mythologies and kind of the cultures over there, like they have a lot of different kind of mythologies for, you know, forest creatures or creatures that takes kids and things like that. So I kind of want to get into that headspace and then figure out how to like bring magic into it. Maybe magic is leaking from, you know, one of the realms into this material plane and is starting to have these wild monsters, and the village has to figure out what to do with it, or maybe they believe it's the spirits that are coming in and the village has like a small like religious vibe to it as well, but they are very much, we believe in the nature gods, and so there are 6 gods that I have them that they believe in. One of them is like the god of the hunt and the sun, I believe. One of them is like the god of the rain and soil, so like if you're a farmer, you worship that god, or you find more favor to that god. So there's kind of this naturalistic worship of gods when it's nature, and then when nature reacts in the forest, it's like, ooh, is that an omen? Is one of the gods mad at us? Like, what's happening? So I want that vibe. And then eventually you go out of the village, you know, long term, and you see like, oh, there are people who are studying magic, and then kind of explore that element of it. So that's where my mind is going at when it goes to creation. I don't have anything set in concrete yet. I think we talked about earlier, life has been crazy the last month.
It's still
or two.
a movement.
Yeah. And so that's where I want to go with it. And especially coming from a D&D background of playing Dungeons and Dragons so long, and their magic system is more of a hard magic system. I want to explore this soft magic and see what happens.
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me of for whatever reason, it reminds me of the movie Seventh Son. Have you ever seen that?
Mm-hmm.
So it's maybe Van Helsing is a bit of another one. It's a movie where they sort of mix the two, where there's like all these superstitions and like witches and or like the Brothers Grimm, right? Like, but there's an explanation to it, and one of them is like a scientist and is explaining how all of these apparitions and witches and stuff have been able to do this and what they're doing with each move. It's like, okay, well, she has the ring of whatever and that does this, you know. It's like where the magic comes from is still a bit of a mystery, but they know like, oh, this ring does this, you know, it has this properties, it's imbued by whatever. They tell the little history of it. It's like that's just an interesting, I hadn't thought about it until we started doing this episode, that I was like, that's a pretty cool one too, where it's like it is that mystical magic, but there is one person that is explaining it, and it's always like the condescending like scientist character. But anyway, for me, when I'm working on the pirate show I'm trying to do, like a radio show, I'll let you guys know on here when it comes out. But anyway, so for me, because it's a pirate based thing, and there's so many like pirate, you know, movie shows and lore around what it actually was, and then there's a lot of history around it. It's actually pretty detailed, which is cool because captain's logs were a thing.
Oh yeah.
Even for pirates, which is funny. But yeah, so a lot of them kept pretty detailed notes. You know, for me, I don't want to go as magical as like Pirates of the Caribbean, because I felt like that just got ridiculous by the third one, let alone the fourth, fifth, and whatever one they're on. Yeah. And so I don't want to go that route. But what I did enjoy was like that opening scene of Pirates of the Caribbean where he is talking about like, it's bad luck to be talking about pirates on board. It's bad luck to have a woman on board. It's bad luck, you know, like all this superstition that takes very normal, you know, life events and then makes them seem like, you know, they're crazy. And I just want to keep building into the superstitions of pirates. So I've done a lot of research into that. I'd like it to be really soft magic, and I like it to be somewhere along the line of, we don't know whether it was magic or not. That it could just be, you know, a giant squid they saw, not a kraken, you know, it could just be, but you know,
someone drinking too much at night. Yeah. And they're saying things about like mermaids or whatever, and it's just like dolphins or, you know.
Yeah. So that it always lands on half the crew believes this and the other half the crew believes that. Yeah. You know, so that, you know, until we get far enough along, definitely not season 1, you know, we'll see if it works out good, then maybe there'll be a season 2, but definitely not season 1 that I would like to build into any of the creature stuff. I would like it to be like, we found something strange in the ocean because the ocean is a strange place and there's plenty of strange things in it. Things like that, where it's not like somebody cast a spell, somebody, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what how I want that to go. Like I said, I'm still in the outlining, but I'm going to, as I add things in, like there's a witch doctor character. But much like actual witch doctors, they don't do a lot. Controversial take. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like back in the day, like those people were like, this is the remedy that solves everything. And it's just whiskey or something like that.
Cocaine.
Yeah. Whiskey.
Smoking cigarettes.
I feel great.
Yeah. Thanks, Coke. Right. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of where I want to be. Like we don't know enough about the world, and we're trying this stuff that makes us feel funny, and that's probably good enough.
Yeah. That's dope. I like it.
So that's where the voodoo magic and creepy things will seep into the pirate show.
Solid.
Which the soft name is Love and Death on the High Seas right now. So that's a pretty mouthy title. So trying to condense that down, but
gotcha.
That's where we're at the moment. That's our working title.
Solid.
So now that we've discussed what hard and soft magic is, what our stories are, what our preferences are, and you've got a firm grasp on that, we're going to talk about what inspires us, and then we're going to come back on the far side of that interlude, and we're going to talk about Reween, and we're going to build a magic system for that, and we're going to see how that affects a previously made setting. So Reween, if you haven't listened to our city building episode, fantasy city building episode, then go back and check that out. That's where we got Reween. We generated it live on air.
Yep.
And so it's a cool little town, Furbolg town. They've got a lot of magic and a lot of history there. And so we're going to revisit that and add a different type of magic and sort of rebuild with that perspective the town of Reween. So we'll hit that up when we get back. So Michael.
Yes.
What on earth has been inspiring you this week?
Well, I think I'm a little bit more prepped for this one.
Good.
We put it in the outline.
Because we've been doing this for months.
Yeah. So I was at a friend's recently. My wife and I went up to North Carolina to hang out, take a little vacation. And one of the guy that we were with, Evan, we've been trying Shannon's husband, who was on the podcast. So we tried to get him to talk about his creative process, and he politely said no. But so we were up there. He got inspired by some Demon Slayer stuff, and then he really let me into his brain. And so it inspired me because he just sits at a computer and he just finds the music that he likes, and he's got a really good sound system set up, and he just listens to the music, and the music really drives his whole creative process as far as like building the campaign, making the characters that he needs to make, creating plot points. Like it's just all happening in the music, and he's just like kind of like eyes closed, bobbing his head, and it's just, you can see the magic happening. And then he like turns it because he had a little like den area, and so his back is towards us, and they got some couches in there, and we're just hanging out, and he like turns around, he's like, what about this? Y'all, you guys interested in this? And we're like, yeah, sure, and then he just turns back and just listens, and then he's like, what about this? What about this? And like you can just see like his brain is going like 100 miles an hour, but he's just listening to music. And that's one of the things, as he's DM'd for us before, I liked is how he uses music for characters to introduce them, kind of like a TV show introduces characters, right? There's the Lannister theme. Whenever the Lannisters are on screen, you can hear their theme music. Whenever certain characters are on screen, you can hear their music. So then when you hear their music and they're not around, you're like, what's happening? What's going on? And so it was interesting to see his process, and so I tried to kind of really take that on and make like a theme for my characters that I'm starting to create. And I ran like a small little like 45-minute one shot for my wife, and they were there and a part of it. But I tried to like really hit the music beats into the storyline, and it really inspired me to just like listen to the music and add that into my story beats, because we talked about like techno and metal and things like that. Things that have a beat help me create, but they don't help in the game session. You know, you wouldn't be playing that necessarily in the session, but there are other like fantasy music genres or fantasy songs that you could play that will definitely get a response from your players. And so to me, that was inspiring to really just listen to the music and figure out where I can put this song. This song is going to be the song for this character, and whenever they're here, we play this song, or they have like a list of different songs that are associated with them. He has playlists for his like his NPCs, and he'll have a playlist of it, and it'll be like 5 or 6 songs. But it's like, this is if this happens, this is if this happens, this is if this happens, but it's all related to that character. And then he's got songs for his PCs. It's like, this was their song for when they left home. This was their song for this. They don't know what this song is for, but it's there. I'm like, oh dang, okay. So it was just really interesting to see how he used music so well into his D&D stuff and his storytelling. And whenever you watch things like Critical Role, like every now and then there's a song that like is associated to the action or the scene that is happening, but for the most part it's like this generic kind of song, this generic type of mood. But his is very specific to the mood. Of course, he's not streaming, so he doesn't have to worry about copyright or anything like that. So but man, YouTube, Spotify, they are great places to use music for your games, or just use music to hit that character beat. If you're thinking about your villain in your writing or in your show, you could have this music associated with them so you can get in the headspace. You can understand what their day-to-day is, why they're acting the way they are. Really inspiring to me. And like I said, I've been trying to do that a little bit more as far as get a specific song for a specific time. It is time consuming because I listen a lot of my music on the go. Don't really have a lot of time to like sit and listen, but yeah, though that's what's been inspiring me.
Yeah, that's really
week.
cool. Yeah. I'm jealous. I'm glad you got to see that.
Yeah. Oh, it was interesting. I was like, his brain be working. You listen to there's a Demon Slayer song of I think it's Rengoku fighting Akaza from Demon Slayer. They made like a movie out of it, and he listened to that song so many times. And I was like, when this song comes in our session, be worried. And I was correct.
That's cool.
Yeah. So what's been inspiring you this week?
To be honest, I had something. I was listening to your story and it totally went out of my head. It's like, that's dope. I was just paying attention to what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things that like I've been working on internally, like just as a human being, about like creating habits and things like that. Like I heard this YouTube video that was about bookending bad habits that you want to change. And essentially, like once you feel yourself wanting to do the bad habit, once you realize, oh man, this is something I don't want to do, but here I am participating, then you go, okay, what were the moments that led up to this? You just mark that, and then from where you are, immediately go participate in something that you like doing that is positive to you. And then eventually, like, so then you do that other thing. And once you're done with that other thing, you know, even if it was like 5-10 minutes, once you're done with that other thing, you bookend it again. You say, okay, that was the end of that segment. And your brain will literally, I mean, it starts making a new connection. So what happens is it replaces, you know, once you get the desire to do the thing that you don't want to do anymore, then your brain makes a connection between that and the thing that you did to replace it. Right. And so eventually it just makes a bridge and says, okay, I have this feeling. So that means I want to, play guitar, whatever it is, whatever it is, that's a positive behavior for you. That's like, well, I don't want to eat pizza at midnight. Instead, I'm going to, have this glass of water. I don't know. Terrible example, but
I mean, it's just like sometimes you lay in bed and you're like, I want to scroll on my phone and go through social media. And you're like, no, I just need to get up and throw my phone somewhere else so I can be productive for today.
Yeah. Like I'll tell my Alexa to play my liked songs on Spotify when I wake up in the morning, and it plays in the living room, and so it's like, okay, then my body is less reluctant to allow me to get out of bed. Right. And it's stuff like that is like, I've just been, because I've got the same thing where I'll just sit there and scroll, and it's like, so I've already had some pretty quick success with it. I think it was like a day or two ago I saw that video, and it's amazing. Just getting the playbook for your brain is a really great thing, because then it's like, okay, yeah, I'm doing these things, but it's not serving me the way I want it to. So I'm going to change that. Yeah. And now I know how, because that's the playbook for your mind. So that's really been inspiring me, because I mean, not only for the obvious reasons of better habits, but also because it's making me think of what I've really been diving into with outlining for the pirate story is cause and effect relationships. So I have like carry forwards from each outline and things that are callbacks for each outline. And so basically, I'm making sure that there is a moment before, and if it's important, we saw it or it was at least discussed. And so it's like this daisy chain of I'm combining events, and it makes everything feel like it's connected and happening in real time. And that's an age-old story technique, I'm sure, but it's not something that I really cognitively or like intentionally thought of until seeing that YouTube video and trying it out on my own habits. So it's like, further proof you can learn anything anywhere.
That's right.
But yeah, so that's what's been inspiring me. Let's get into this Reween business and start talking about what kind of magic we want in Reween. I know what we had there was a very D&D style, like hard magic, where it's like you can learn and you have your skill trees and all this stuff, because there was a deity living in a cave, I believe, underneath. Yeah. And it was very nature based, which was a cool setting. Go back and listen to that episode. I'm going to after this. This is cool. Anyway, so we're in Reween. What kind of magic you want to throw at this place right now?
Well, do we want to keep kind of the vibe that we set with it? It was very nature based.
Yeah, I think, and it was also, we're somewhere in the middle, because it's tribal. And so there is a lot of superstition wrapped up in it, but is also set to be in D&D. And so instead of, I think first it would probably be beneficial to take it out of D&D and drop the rules, and then say, okay, what would this story, let's say we take Furbolg is like the main society that lives there. So let's say we take these Furbolgs out of D&D and put them in the world, and like, what is the story we want to tell? Let's come up with a name. Where's the name generator here? It always helps me to just do a character. And so we'll just do quick name. These are human names, so
here we go. You gotta go to fantasy.
Halima is probably a female name, but that's cool. I've never heard that one before. If your name is Halima, I'm sorry. Nice name, by the way. Do they have Furbolg names on here?
I was gonna look. I'm pretty sure they do.
They have Finnish, as in from Finland.
Furbolg names.
Yeah, here we go.
We got.
We're gonna have another mob best in here.
Yeah.
Peathorn. Let's see. Generous, which is just generous. Olanon.
Olanon.
Ooh, Glenfear.
Glenfear.
I like. Okay, so we got Glenfear, the Furbolg, and Glenfear is GLYN FIR for the FIR for those of you at home. Anyway, so Glenfear is going to be our main character, and we want to know, like, we're building the story from the perspective of magic, and so we want to know what story we're going to tell with Glenfear. This is just another method to come up with ideas. So I'm just trying that by adding a character, and we'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, what was the last question you just said?
So what story do we want to tell about Glenfear? What's the most interesting story about Furbolgs? And to me, because it's a tribe, the first thing I think of is going to be a coming of age story.
Okay, perfect.
So
perfect.
this is his foray into adulthood, and this is an easy time for things to go wrong historically as tribes are concerned, right?
Yeah.
Because this is testing him for the future.
Mm-hmm.
This is the hazing
Right.
to coming an adult. And so what is he going to come in contact with? Is it something that is like going to test him physically to his limits? You know, is this a character that we're going to run into an age-old villain who knows how to use magic, and he's going to have to learn by going along the path of his ancestors? Is he going to have to learn and commune or go through scrolls? So, you know,
finding like an old magic, like you said, like an age-old magic, right? Your story wants to be someone who's different, and might be breaking the mold. With this age-old magic is like centuries-old magic that hasn't been around for a long time. So he's gonna have to, I don't know, not fight against it, but also need some type of blessing or.
Like that's the villain, is he's fighting against this younger magic that has appeared, sort of like a good versus evil? Or is it like he is coming in contact with this magic and maybe he's the first one in his tribe to do so? Is that?
I think that was more what I was
Gotcha.
thinking.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
So he encounters magic on this journey he goes on. So maybe there is like,
I'm thinking like maybe a dark magic or some type of like ancient dark magic that is kind of like come out finally after the slumber of 1,000 years or something like that.
so maybe instead of having the witch living under the village like we had, maybe instead we have like there is a cave outside of the village that is supposed to be like a discernment cave, that's what they've used for centuries, and instead of it being that, it's because the deity was sleeping, and so basically it was creating dreams around the people that went in, and they were using that as like, this is a divine intervention. And then when he goes, it's finally awoken, and suddenly he gets comes in contact with the magic and maybe learns how to use it too.
And he gets touched by it and has to learn how to control the magic.
Like Venom, kind of.
Yeah, kind of like Venom. I think that I was thinking like a little bit more of like Venom and Aragon, where like they were touched by magic. There is now a mark on him, and now you are allowed to use it, but you don't necessarily know how it's going to come out.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is starting to sound more like hard magic to me. So
not in that sense though. I was thinking it sounded like soft magic.
Okay.
What made you think hard magic?
So for me, it's like we know exactly where it's coming from, and it sounds like there is a cost every time he uses it. So it's not as fanciful, and it's also, we're talking about a dark magic, which in order for it to be, for it to be easier narratively and for it to fit with the trope in an easy way, it's like, well, this hard magic is going to detract from him in a very easy to see kind of way, right? So when he uses it, he is damaged in some way. He's diminished. And so that feels more applicable to like an evil, a stereotypically evil character than like, okay, it's fanciful. He uses the magic and maybe there's like a, you know, like a deal with the devil trick in it where something goes a little bit negative that he doesn't think is a big deal but ends up being, you know, it's not like that. It's like it diminishes him to participate in this power. So that's what I was thinking. Why do you think it's soft magic?
I was thinking it because it's like he doesn't know. They don't know what happened. We know as like the authors what happened there, as far as, you know, this god that gave people dreams now is giving him this magic. He's touched by something, but he doesn't know what it actually came from. He's in this cave and the magic has awoken. The deity has awoken or is beginning to awake from its slumber, and maybe there's like an earthquake or something that happens or some type of shift in whatever. Maybe he opens something and it's like a kind of like the mummy. When you open the sarcophagus, then, you know, this kind of wind blows out and he doesn't understand what he's been touched by. And him having to learn the magic is like him having to control his maybe angsty emotions. You know, he's coming of age, so it's probably going to be a teenager. He's probably going to have to learn how to control his rage. And when he rages, it, you know, it gives him power, you know. But like you said, what's the cost? Maybe it's, you know, slumber for 2 days or whatever. Or, you know, his joy, his excitement like causes fires, you know. And so he has to really like learn to control his emotions at some point. Or, you know, I don't know. That's why I was thinking soft magic, because we know like where it came from, but in the character's point of view, something happened and no one understands like the cave is, they still think the cave is the cave. They just think maybe you didn't succeed in your coming of age ceremony because you don't have the wild dreams that everyone else has whenever they have their coming of age.
I like that better, because not only like we can say, yes, he was touched by it. And maybe like unbeknownst to this deity, he's been touched by it.
Ooh, yeah.
And because the magic may or may not come from the deity itself, it actually becomes this, like you said, coming of age story where in his quest to defeat the childish things in him, he also has to defeat this magical beast, right?
Yeah. What if he got like a sliver? What if other things in the area got touched with the sliver of divinity, and he has just
the sliver of divinity? I'm writing that down.
He has this little element of magic, but so do some of the other creatures, and because they're larger creatures, they have like they're more tethered to the divinity and they have more power and they can draw from that power. So how does he overcome it and use it? Maybe there's, I don't know, that's just where my brain is kind of going. And maybe there is some type of like also natural kind of magic, whereas like the world and maybe the area has some type of magical abilities, like fruits have like a certain thing, or like herbs and stuff. Maybe he has to like make a potion to use a different type of magic to fight the divinity, like druidic magic. I don't know. That's where I'm kind of like spinning around right now.
And it almost immediately is like, okay, well, now he has to save his town from something they don't believe in because he failed his trial and is now like sort of ostracized and like ostracized in this almost like Feywild, like we've talked about before, like this crazy place that's fallen apart. But because he's almost marked by it, the first thing that these new sliver of divinity beasts are going after is this village, right?
Yeah.
And so it becomes like he has to be the adult for the village, he has to be the adult for himself, and he has to find his way to defeat evil in his own life, right? I think that starts being a very well-rounded story pretty quickly. And just because, you know, we've added magic in a new way, like this is a very specific character story that just jumps out and feels very obvious now. It's like, well, we couldn't do it any other way now.
Right.
Even though we just did a few weeks ago, make Reween and have it set up in an entirely different way. But because we approach it through the character of magic, it grows in a totally different way. I think that's so cool.
Yeah.
and a good, I mean, we got to have some sort of nod to the ending here. I think people are going to be on a cliffhanger.
I mean, what is the ending? This is the beginning of Glenfear's story.
So let's say Glenfear fails his test, learns how to do magic after a while. He's ostracized from his town. He protects it. He defeats this deity, and the town realizes that that's what he's done.
What if they get mad at him?
Like, what's the ending, right?
What if like, how dare you defeat this thing that's been giving us dreams and has protected us for so long? It's like, well, I protected you. It's like, well, then we did something wrong if the divinity was awoken and is now trying to banish us or try and cleanse us from the earth. Why are we to stop the gods? You know?
It's almost blaspheming, right? Like,
yeah. So his story could be a story of adventure now, and a story of, you know, trying to find oneself in the world when you have no support around you. And who do you find? Who trusts him? Who are his friends? Does he have any friends by the end of it? Have his friends also turned on him once they understand what has actually been done?
And he's gone from completely believing in the system to the enthusiasm and fear of going on this coming of age story and finally joining the elders of the tribe, to being completely disillusioned and cut off from everything he ever knew. Right. So that's movie 2 right there.
Yep.
Yeah. Episode 2, whatever it ended up being. Like, I feel like it's, I like that. Yeah. I like that as a good send off for Glenfear.
And what's cool about it is there's so many elements just in talking about that you can see in other works of fiction. Like in Aragon, I believe this is like closest to the story of his cousin in the hometown. They believe that he is the one that caused this issue, or his family is the one that caused this issue, and he's trying to defend them, but they're still mad at him, but they also want to protect their own, but also people are dying and their farms are getting hurt. And so it's like this kind of like complex situation of human emotions that you get to play with. And I think that's something that in one of the topics that we talked about recently, or at least in one of the notes, that people follow characters more than they follow the plot line. And I think there's some truth to that, but there's also a lot of character going back and forth as far as like human emotions going on, and anger and sorrow, and trying to understand like your point of view and this point of view. I think it could be a really, really interesting story that, you know, we just said, where does magic come from?
Yeah, I've always heard simple relationships, complex people.
Yeah.
So like, you know, just what was great about Jim and Pam from The Office was the will they, won't they, but it's only a good will they, won't they, because everybody's cards were on the table. Everything was very simple. It was like, she's with somebody else that she wants to stay with, but doesn't really love, and he loves her, you know, or they love each other, but she just, you know, is unwilling to pursue that because she's a complex person. Right. So it's like love triangles are as old as time, right? As far as storytelling. I'm sure as far as people too, but whatever. So it's like the more simple the relationship, the easier it is to tell complex stories. Another idea from a couple of weeks ago that was like, making a great amount of structure around a piece of art allows you to be really creative in that space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, you know, just now, us creating in Reween, we have I think both of us have a very clear idea of what Reween is to us until now. You know, now that we've gone through this, it's completely different, and feels completely different. Just thinking about it, imagining the place is like, it feels a little more serious now than it did before. And a little bit more like dangerous than it did before. And, you know, it's just so cool that we can change so much so quickly. Yeah. I forget what my original point was, but anyway, we out here creating, it's changing stuff. It's cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for another world building episode. Thanks for coming along. I'm sure you guys are shouting at me what my point was going to be. So I'm going to leave that as the question for this episode. What was my point? Answer below. Wherever you are in the globe, thank you so much for listening, for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.